What happens when a society built on stable work quietly stops offering stability? And if people continue working anyways, what does survival start to look like? This video isn't about unemployment. It's about people who show up every day, do what's expected of them, and find the effort no longer leads forward. For decades, Japan's work system was built around a clear promise. A full-time job was meant to provide a structure, income, and long-term security. Loyalty mattered, the time mattered, and if you stayed, the system was supposed to hold you. That expectation shaped nearly every adult decision, where people lived, when they married, whether they felt safe, planning ahead. And for many workers, this system still exists, but it no longer represents everyone. Over time, permanent positions became less common, contract and temporary roles expanded, expectations still remained high, but the guarantees weakened quietly. Now from the outside, the system still appeared intact, the offices stayed full, and productivity continued. The image of stability still remained, but inside the system, the pressure began moving downward. Work didn't necessarily disappear, it started to get redistributed. So in many workplaces, tasks left unfinished by senior staff are absorbed by the junior employees, not because they are directly instructed to do so, but because the work still has to be completed. Now this transfer rarely comes with a formal acknowledgement. It happens through silence and expectation. Junior workers stay late to ensure projects move forward, and contract workers accept extra responsibilities to appear reliable. This isn't always described as exploitation. It's framed as teamwork, as learning, as paying one's dues. Now over time, this presence becomes a performance. Staying late signals commitment, and leaving on time feels noticeable, even when it's allowed. Workplace hierarchy plays a significant role here. Senior employees often hold authority and security. Junior and contract workers carry uncertainty. When work spills beyond defined roles, it tends to flow towards those with the least ability to refuse. Entry-level workers learn quickly that saying no can carry consequences. Fewer hours, fewer renewals, being quietly passed over. So people learn to adapt. They take on more, they stay longer, and they manage exhaustion privately. Not because they believe it's fair, but because it feels safer than resistance. Now as the work expands, the recovery shrinks. Their long hours, irregular schedules, and extended commutes make returning home less practical for some workers. Rest begins to happen wherever it's possible, rather than where it's intended. So internet cafes and capsule hotels become part of the routine, not permanent housing, but regular stops, short-term solutions that are used repeatedly. Now these spaces were never designed for daily life, but for many workers, they make an already demanding schedule manageable. And what's striking is how rarely this is described as a crisis. Workers don't necessarily frame their lives as extreme. They tend to describe it as normal, necessary, and functional. Now meals become simple and repetitive. Now food is chosen for convenience rather than enjoyment, because eating becomes a maintenance rather than a ritual. Housing becomes cautious, belongings stay minimal, and moving is expected because life narrows without breaking. And by the time many of these workers realize they're stuck, the problem is no longer where they sleep, it's the momentum. Now from the outside, the escape appears straightforward. You work more hours, you save your money, you find a better job, you move into stable housing. But each of those steps depends on the level of predictability that many workers no longer have. Contract and temporary work rarely offer consistent schedules. Shifts change, hours fluctuate, income rises and falls without warning. Planning becomes difficult when even the next week is uncertain. Housing magnifies this instability, of course. Moving into a permanent apartment often requires upfront costs, proof of steady employment, and in some cases, a guarantor. Now these requirements aren't designed for people living day to day. They assume stability already exists. For workers relying on the internet cafes or short-term accommodations, the gap between where they are and where they need to be feels wide. Not because they lack in motivation, but because the system requires them to be stable before it allows them to become stable. So people stay where they are, not because it's acceptable, but because it's accessible. Over time, survival begins to replace progress. Sleep happens in fragments, and rest is shallow. Days are organized around access rather than comfort, where you can sit, and where you can recharge, where you can exist without being asked to leave. When most of your energy is spent maintaining balance, there's little left for change. And there's also the weight of social expectation, because many workers avoid talking openly about their situation, not out of denial, but out of caution. Admitting difficulty can feel like admitting failure, and asking for help can feel like placing a burden on others. Some don't tell their families, and others downplay their circumstances to their friends. Silence becomes a form of protection. From the outside, this makes the problem harder to see, and from the inside, it makes it easier to endure without questioning. Routine plays a powerful role here. At first, places like net cafes feel temporary, a short-term solution, a stopgap. But repetition changes perception. Familiarity reduces your urgency. What once felt uncomfortable becomes manageable, and then it becomes normal. So once that happens, the idea of leaving starts to feel risky. Leaving requires energy, it requires planning, and it also requires the willingness to disrupt a routine that, while limited, is at least predictable. Now, for workers already operating with little margin, risk can feel dangerous because a missed paycheck or a failed attempt at change can have immediate consequences, so adaptation feels safer than ambition. This doesn't mean people stop wanting more. It simply means they prioritize survival over possibility. Over time, identity shifts as well. Work becomes the main organizing force in life, not because it's fulfilling, but because it's reliable. Days are measured by shifts rather than goals, and the weeks blend together without clear markers of progress. Long-term plans are postponed. Relationships become harder to maintain. Social lives shrink, not out of disinterest, but out of exhaustion. Now, what's striking in many of these videos documenting these lives is the absence of drama. There is no collapse, no visible breaking point, just quiet continuation. This is what makes the situation difficult to categorize. It doesn't resemble a crisis in a way people expect. Everything still functions, people still show up, and the city still continues to run. But functioning is not the same as moving forward. When people live in this way, the system begins to treat it as normal as well. Temporary solutions stop being questioned, and then the survival strategies become more socially accepted. And at that point, the question shifts, because it's no longer why people end up here. It's what would have to change for leaving to feel possible again. And for a lot of workers in Japan, that answer isn't clear yet. Thank you for watching.